All right. Module 2, writing interview questions. The right questions for the job. Okay. So I have to confess, I love bad interview questions. I love the stories. Um, for example, my wife and I were going to grad school or undergraduate school at the time, and she's applying for a job at a tanning salon. And the owner of the tanning salon, nice lady, well-meaning, asked the question, and I think it was a group interview, so it was my wife and other people are all there being interviewed at the same time for the job. It was asked the question, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? That was literally one of the interview questions. She got the job, so whatever answer must have been impressive. But here's a bunch of other questions I've collected. So if you have your own, by the way, side note, if you have your own fun interview story, I want to hear it. Please share it. Find me on LinkedIn, Tommy May PhD, and please share it with me. I'd love to hear it. Now, I'm going to use a quick analogy to help put it in perspective. And you think, well, Tommy, you get interview responses, and you are absolutely right. If you ask these questions, do you believe in Bigfoot? What is your biggest weakness? Tell me how you wash a car. What is the funniest thing that's happened to you recently? You're going to get some great stories. You're going to get some information. And that information will predict something. But you have to remember, we're trying to predict a psychological principle called job performance. And predicting something in the soft sciences like psychology, which this is what we're doing, and that's why my degree is in industrial organizational psychology. It's about measuring things in the workspace, about your employees. We have to be very precise. We want to take all the white noise out of it. So imagine you're trying to predict the weather. You don't have a weatherman. You've got some books to tell you how to predict the weather, and it tells you you've got to measure a couple things. So you're probably going to measure the temperature throughout the day. You're going to measure barometric pressure. Maybe you're going to measure precipitation fall and a few other things, all with the hopes to predict what the weather will be like in 3 weeks when you have a big outdoor event planned, right? And so each day, each of those measurements is going to help you predict what that weather is going to be, right? And we're trying to predict how successful these applicants might be in the job you define. So we've defined the task. We've painstakingly defined the behaviors, what we expect. And now we've got to write the questions. This is, are we going to take temperature? Are we going to take barometric pressure, right? Now, if we're trying to predict the weather in 3 weeks without a weatherman, you're not going to take out your very exact laser measure of length to measure your driveway, because that's not going to help you. Your measurement will be very exact, right? And that could probably predict how many cars can park on your driveway, or how long your driveway is, but that's not going to help you predict the weather. So we're trying to predict job performance, and these would be great questions for conversation, to see how well this person is maybe imaginative, right? But unless it's related to the job, we don't want to ask those questions, because it's going to add white noise or distracting information that's not going to help you predict if they're going to be successful. So I often get asked, then what is the best question I should ask? What should I be asking participants, or applicants? The truth is, it's the question that relates to the behaviors you define. That's why we set up that foundation. That's why we have that bedrock foundation of, this are the behaviors. This is what amazing looks like in the role that I have. So we want the questions that relate to that. So the way we do that is through structural behavioral interviewing. So in a structural behavioral interview, candidates are asked to give specific examples of when they've demonstrated a particular job-related competency or skill in the past. So bear with me, this is going to make sense, and I hope you get this. No, I'm sure you're going to get this. So in a structured behavioral interview, the structure is, we're asking the same type of question, we're getting the same type of information from each of our candidates. The behavioral is, we're asking about a time they've demonstrated the necessary behaviors for the role that will lead to success in the role, in the past. So if you need somebody that can prioritize tasks and time manage, say, you would ask about, tell me about a time that you've had to prioritize competing tasks. So it's not about what would you do if you had competing priorities, because I could tell you what I would do if I wanted to lose 10, 20 pounds, right? I'd stop eating candy every night. I'd eat more vegetables, right? But if you ask me, what have you done to lose 20 pounds? I would say, I don't think I've ever lost 20 pounds, right? Or I'd have to make it up. And here's the key. When somebody goes to make up an answer, something they have done, they don't have experience to pull back on, so they can't give you the rich data. And that's why the second half of the slide here at the bottom, right here, candidates answers, we want candidates to answer using the situation, behavior, outcome, the SBO format, meaning when they're giving an answer, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future, you're going to be understanding, you're going to be probing to ask questions, and you're going to dig out to understand the situation of the example, the past behavior they've exhibited, what they decided to do in that situation, the action they took, that's the behavior, and then what was the outcome, the results of the action they took, the outcome, right? So that's what a situational behavior interview is. Is it successful? Yes. In fact, recently, last night, I was talking on Facebook with somebody who's like, you look at the research and interviews don't predict. It's just as good as throwing a dart at the board. Well, that's not true. Unfortunately, it is true for some people's experience because there is a science to it. It's literally a science. That's part of what the field of industrial organizational psychology studies, and the research has shown that a well-conducted behavioral interview can have the ability to predict as well as a rigorous cognitive assessment or an intelligence test. And intelligence tests are some of the most effective predictors of performance. So structured behavior interview, an SBI, is going to give the applicant to give specific examples of how they've actually performed in past situations. And I'll walk you through that. And this will give you a good idea of how they're going to perform in similar situations in the future, right? Further, it's going to share this structure, it's going to ensure a consistent and fair process for all candidates. And then because we've started with our foundation of what good looks like in the role, you're going to get critical job-specific skill and knowledge. And that's what the answers will be based around. That's what your questions will be based around. Further, it's going to be so difficult for them to make up answers on the fly if they haven't experienced it somewhat in the past. And they're going to rely on their experience to answer your question. And therefore, you're going to know what their experience is. Further, you're going to feel more confident about your appraisal of the answers because you're going to hear the rich or lack of rich information in detail in their responses. And you have now a very clear vision in your head after you've gone through the work to define the behaviors of the role and what amazing looks like in the role, what competencies, what skills they have to pull on to do that. And the last part, this is a bit of science, a 0.51 correlation is very high. So a perfect correlation is 1.0, right? And in the psychological sciences, a 0.5 correlation, especially in the field of IO psychology, is very high. That's very high. That means you can go to Vegas for those numbers and win a lot. So you're wondering now, Tommy, how do I write interview questions? Well, it's not that complicated. First, you want to make sure the questions are going to elicit information about past work behaviors that are relevant to the job. That's our goal, right? And so we do that by first identify what you want to learn from the question. And that's the competencies we've talked about in the past. And then the question will typically start in somewhere in this fashion is, tell me about a time, can you share a time when, describe when you have, describe a time, how have you? So it's prompting past tense. I want to hear what you've done in the past. And when we get over, there'll be a module that talks about how the interview should flow. And I'll talk about how to make sure candidates respond in that situation, behavior, outcome format. And then you're going to want to add some follow-up questions that help clarify the question, help direct them about the detail you want to know. So maybe it's, how do you know you were successful? What other options did you consider? Or what options did you consider? What would you do differently if given the chance? What was the end outcome, So I've got, to bring this to life, I've given you some examples, or we're going to stay all through this module. I'm going to keep giving you examples about this Acme Wellness Center as a receptionist. So if you're hiring for a receptionist, man, you've struck gold. I've written questions for you, and you can do some tweaking and make them your own. But anyways, so you'll remember we had these 3 competencies, or 3 skills. Customer care prioritizes according to business need, and organized attention to detail. So I've taken those, and what I've done, if you look to these 2 slides, I've highlighted the areas I want to learn more. Now, this is identify what you want to learn from the question. So here is my bedrock foundation of what good looks like in the role. Here highlighted is what I want to learn from my question. I want to understand how they anticipate and proactively resolve customer needs, concerns, and problems, right? That's customer care. For prioritizes according to business needs, I want to understand how they show good judgment when trade-offs are needed between competing tasks, right? Because I realize that's one that trips people up a lot. Organized attention to detail, I want to know how they maintain records. I really want to understand how they're going to retain the records of sales and scheduled appointments. Because if sales aren't recorded properly and a customer is asked to pay again, or their schedule hasn't been written down correctly, you've got customers mad at you, and you've got your personal trainers and massage therapists upset with you, right? So what I've done here, the blue highlighted parts, these are the questions, the core of the question, the information I'm trying to get. And the white parts are the questions, the stuff I've added to create the questions, right? So first question, customer care. Can you tell me about a time you were able to proactively resolve a customer concern? How did you uncover their concern, and what was the outcome? So here, I want the applicant to think about when they take care of a customer and they proactively resolve the concern. And so I'm going to be listening for how was it proactive, and not the customer saying, I'm upset about this thing or that thing or the other, and then they're resolving the concern. But they recognize there's a concern. They're able to pull it out of the customer, and they're able to resolve it. And then I want to understand what the outcome was, right? For prioritizes according to business need. Describe a time you had to decide between multiple competing but important tasks. How did you decide what to prioritize? What were the unintended consequences of your decision? So here, what I like about this question is, I want to know when you're in the thick of that problem, you've got competing tasks, what are you doing? And what's your decision process? And then the kicker that I'm really trying to get to when the rubber meets the road, when things are difficult, when things start to break down, is I want them to share with me the unintended consequences of the decision, right? So what didn't go well, right? And another one I could have put there was, what did you learn from the process? What would you do differently if you had the chance? And then finally, organize attention to detail. In this job, in this question, this is another format I wanted to exemplify. So here I'm explaining a little bit about the job, which is a nice way back and forth to interview, and it's a great way to write the interview questions sometimes. Here you're providing information about the job, so you're giving them content and information, and then in turn, you're asking for information about them. Because you have to remember that interview is a back and forth. It's a sales pitch of you're trying to convince them that this is a good job for them, and they're trying to convince you that they're a good employee for them. And it's a two-way street here. So once again, organize attention to detail. In this job, you'll often have to maintain important sales and scheduling records that are used by all staff members. Tell me about a time you had to keep important notes or records that others had to read and understand. How did you ensure your record was clearly understood? So here I've given them that information. I've asked them a question related to that information so they understand the context in which it fits in, but they've also learned about one of the things that they would be doing on the job. So there you have it. That's how to write questions. Each of these questions is past tense. Tell me about a time. When have you? And I'm asking some tough questions, and I'm going to be listening to the response for the situation, behavior, outcome. So that completes Module 2. Next, we move into Module 3, and this is where we write the question anchors. Wait until I tell you what the anchors are. It's going to be great.